Thank you, Congressman McGovern, for coming on to the show. Just want to get right into it. You recently signed a letter asking the DOJ to review the case of Steven Donziger, which, as we speak today, is about to go to trial tomorrow. What made you concerned about this rare judge-ordered prosecution?
Well, what made me concerned is everything about the case. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be a lawyer, but by any measure, his being under house arrest for a seemingly endless period, and the way the judge has handled this case just seems just so out of the ordinary that many of us decided to write to the Attorney General and say, we want the Justice Department to look at this. Again, we can't interfere in legal matters, but nonetheless, this doesn't seem right. So, that's why we did the letter, and we'll see what happens when he goes to the court on Monday, and what happens then. But again, this just doesn't seem normal in any sense of the word.
Right. Have you ever heard of a case where there was a request for the Justice Department to take action, to where a judge referred a matter to the Department of Justice, which declined to prosecute, and then the judge ordered a prosecution instead?
I have never heard of such a case ever.
You think?
But I haven't done an exhaustive. I haven't done exhaustive research on this. But again, it just strikes me as so unusual that it has to give anybody who's watching this pause. And again, when you look beyond the unusualness of the way this is being handled legally, and you get to what this really is all about, and that is Texaco, now Chevron's, polluting an area the size of Rhode Island in Ecuador, and just kind of leaving it there. And these poor people are having to deal with the contamination and all that goes with it, including illness, unclean water. Again, it raises all kinds of alarm bells that maybe this is an example of a big corporation having undue influence on a legal proceeding.
Mm. And one of the reasons that I'm very glad we got to speak today is both of us, we've been to the Ecuadorian Amazon to witness the pollution there. Can you tell me about your trip? When it happened, what you saw in the Amazon rainforest and the drilling sites?
Yeah. So I was there in 2008, and I had read about the contamination. I had read about the struggle of the people who lived in the area, but nothing prepared me for what I saw in person. I mean, the area was polluted. I had talked to members of indigenous communities that were no longer being able to maintain their uniqueness, their culture, because the pollution had basically killed their opportunity to live independently. I talked to people who had been diagnosed with cancer at a very early age, and I was there in person, and I smelled the oil everywhere I went, in people's wells, the water they were feeding, they were giving their animals to drink. I saw people with unusual rashes on their bodies. But what was painful for me was the realization that this is a U.S. company that did this. And it seems to me that they, or certainly the United States, has some obligation to clean up this mess. I mean, again, this is in a very, very delicate part of the world. It's right there on the where the Amazon is, and there are rainforests that are being destroyed. And in any event, I came back from that visit very angry and very disturbed. I wrote a letter to then President-elect Obama, in which I said I just returned from a trip to Ecuador and I witnessed firsthand the terrible humanitarian and environmental crisis that has resulted from the decades-long failure to properly clean the contamination left by oil drilling and production. And I talked specifically about visiting the site, that Texaco, now Chevron, operated. And I said in my letter, I says, as an American citizen, the degradation and contamination left behind by this U.S. company in a poor part of the world made me angry and ashamed.
Mm,
Uh, and I still feel that way.
mm. And I very much remember some of the things that you're describing on my own trip there. Particularly, you mentioned the smell that sometimes the smell of the oil even seeped through the fruit trees, in my experience, and some of the farmlands. You spoke to farmers, indigenous people there.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did, and again, you know, these are people who essentially, were suffering as a result of Chevron's negligence, their indifference, and look, the cost to remediate the situation, to fix the situation, is high given the level of contamination. I mean, you must have visited, the same places I did, where you saw that oil pits that were constructed poorly, and when they left, they weren't remediated, and as a result, this has left a toxic legacy for poor campesinos and indigenous people.
Mm.
And maybe, Chevron thinks that because these are poor campesinos and indigenous people that, that nobody would care, or that they don't have any voice, or their voice doesn't matter, but they're wrong. What they did there was shameful. And I remember meeting with representatives of Chevron when I came back to Washington. I remember one representative, a woman, said to me that the oil in her makeup is about equal to what the people of the area are experiencing, which made me even more angry. I wanted to throw her and everybody else out of my office. I mean, the insensitivity, just the total lack of regard for the suffering that they caused. And I I've been told by some that Chevron doesn't want to address this issue because there are other parts of the world where they also have behaved badly, and maybe they'll be held accountable for that. Well, you know what? They ought to be held accountable for every place they contaminated. Period. And just because they're a big corporation with deep pockets and high-priced lawyers doesn't mean that they should just kind of walk away from this. And I think that's part of the reason why they are so exercised over Steve Donziger, is because he helped raise awareness about a terrible tragedy that occurred in Ecuador, that's still occurring in Ecuador. And I think they're embarrassed by it, and they don't want to be held accountable.
So quite a bit has happened since the time of your trip, and my trip for that matter. Since that time, the Ecuadorians won a $9.5 billion judgment, and Chevron filed a lawsuit in New York collaterally attacking that judgment, claiming that it was procured by fraud and corruption. They got a favorable ruling in New York, and that is sort of the genesis of this trial.
Right.
So, have how has your trip back before 2010, before all of this happened, colored your perception? How did you meet Steven Donziger, and what led you to uh, take the action that you did this past week?
So I actually went to college with Steven Donziger. I'm a little older than he is, but we were both at American University, and so I knew him then. Didn't really know him that well, but we knew each other. And so when I had read that he was working on this case, I had reached out to him to try to learn more about what was happening. I mean, I cared deeply about environmental issues, and I I've spent a lot of my career focused in on the issue of human rights. And I think that environmental degradation ought to be classified as a human rights violation. What is happening to the campesinos and the indigenous communities in Ecuador is a human rights violation.
Mm.
And so that's how we reconnected. And he helped us be able to get access to the various places that were contaminated, which I, again, wanted to see with my own eyes, because I think if you see it in person, you have more authority to speak about it. And so when I hear, uh, people try to say that, well, Chevron did nothing wrong. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes, and I would invite anybody to do what I did and what you did. Go there and see for yourself, and then you tell me that everything is just fine. Then tell me that there was no significant contamination. Chevron was trying to tell me that these are poor people, and so they make things up because they're trying to get some money. I mean, I find that kind of characterization insulting and offensive, given the fact that I was there in these communities and I saw the contamination. We did a little town hall type meeting, and person after person after person told me of the various uh, illnesses that they or their family members had dealt with over the years, their children, rashes, cancer, early deaths, all things that prior to this contamination were never even heard of in this community. So, so the damage is real. The contamination is real. The suffering of these people is real. And we have a big corporation that basically has a lot of money and has hired some pretty fancy lawyers to make sure that they don't, make sure that they're not held accountable. I mean, when you think of all the money that they have spent fighting this case, all the money they have spent trashing Steven Donziger, Christ, that could have done a lot in terms of cleaning up the mess that they created. Uh, so so we'll see how this proceeds. But as I said in my letter to then President-elect Obama, I'm ashamed by what a U.S. company did in Ecuador. I mean, it is shameful. I think any American, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, uh, would feel great shame at how this American corporation went in and just um, drilled for oil without taking appropriate safety precautions, without doing what they would do in other countries that had uh, more powerful influence, and they just walked away. And I think it's wrong. So the people there deserve some justice. And again, the way this case is unfolding in New York, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't talk about every legal detail here, but it just seems to me to be so strange that I think it warrants the Justice Department taking a look at this.
Since you've known Steven Donziger for so long, what was your reaction when you first heard the allegations that Chevron leveled against him and the court's findings?
Yeah, I was. Well, let me put it this way. Uh, for as long as I have known Steven Donziger, he has cared deeply about issues of social justice and fairness. He's always, even in college, was a voice for the voiceless. I mean, that's who he was for as long as I have known him. And when Chevron tried to twist his involvement and how the case he brought forward was put together, I wasn't surprised, because this is what big corporations do. I mean, this is what they twist and they manipulate, and they pay people off to say things that would help their case. I mean, it's really hard for anybody to go against a big oil company like Chevron. And Stephen had the audacity to give a voice to the campesinos and the indigenous communities in Ecuador that were adversely impacted. And for that, Chevron, threw everything, including the kitchen sink at them. And, and here we are. And I think at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. But I mean, Steven's a strong guy, and he's a man of conviction. And I trust that he will come out of this. But I go back to where we began here, and that is that the people in Ecuador who have suffered because of Chevron's disregard for them, they will continue to suffer. And again, I think this is a human rights violation. I think, and I think the way in terms of what they're doing to the people of Ecuador, I also think, that the way Steven has been treated these many months now, being in house arrest is, it's almost like he's a political prisoner, and I've just never known of any other case like this, and that's one of the reasons why there were a lot of people from very diverse backgrounds who were stepping up and saying, "Hey, there's something wrong here," and I have no doubt that when all is said and done, and you start connecting the dots, that you'll see Chevron all over the place, and we'll see whether or not the big corporation at the end of the day wins out, or whether or not there's some level of justice that occurs here.
I want to focus on kind of one of the paradoxes of the way now that you and other supporters of Steven Donziger, one of the ways that you're seeking to help him in his current situation is by getting the Justice Department's intervention and oversight of the case. I spoke to Steven Donziger before our conversation. He made a quip that he said, "I must be the only lawyer begging the Department of Justice to prosecute me." Can you unpack that? Why take this action? Why go to the DOJ and say, take over this private prosecution?
Because the private prosecution smells rotten. And those of us who are looking at this do not feel that this in any way, shape, or form represents any kind of justice. This is not right, in my opinion. And so I don't know what else to do, right? I mean, I think the only other thing we could do is appeal to the Justice Department for their intervention. But what's happening right now, it smells rotten. It's not right. And again, I have yet to speak to anybody who I know who's a lawyer or who's familiar with corporate law or who's familiar with New York law, like that would tell me that, oh yeah, this is normal. This is the way, not at all surprised by this. They're all kind of like, I don't know what the hell is going on here. And again, I worry that if this case goes unchecked, then this is yet another bad precedent in terms of big corporations trumping the rights of average citizens. I mean, we've seen over the years how corporations now are being treated as people, that they have an inordinate advantage in many court cases, and we'll see how this goes on Monday, and what the I don't know whether I think they wanted to have it appear live on Zoom, or have it so that the public could actually see the proceedings. And I believe they were denied that request, which is, again, why anybody would think that transparency and openness is a bad thing in any legal proceeding is beyond me. But in any event, we'll have to see how it all works out.
You mentioned you've spoken to two lawyers about this, corporate lawyers. No one has heard of anything like this. One of the co-signers of your letter is, of course, Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is a lead prosecutor in Trump's second impeachment, a Harvard-educated law professor. Have you ever spoken to him about this as well? He must know how unusual this is. And just from my particular research, I can say I've spoken to numerous prosecutors, former federal prosecutors about this, and only one had heard of any case like this which had been overturned on appeal. So
So he knew that I was organizing this letter, and he reached out to me to say, I want to go on this letter.
mm,
So because I think he believes that what is happening here is so unusual. And as you point out, I mean, he's not just a lawyer, he's a constitutional law professor. I mean, constitutional law expert. And, you know, you know, and he and the others who signed the letter, you know, are all appalled by this. Look, and I think if we had more time, we probably could have gotten many more members of Congress to sign on. I mean, we drafted this and we moved this in a pretty tight timetable. Um, but um, but it again, it somebody at the Justice Department needs to look at this because this doesn't appear right. It this smells bad, and you know we need people to be watching. And I think that's the other thing here is that you know part of one of the reasons why we felt compelled to do something you know in a short period of time here, and we probably should have started something a long time ago, but was because you know there's you know there's a court proceeding coming up, and and I think Chevron's counting on people not watching, not paying attention. You know that's when they can get what they want done without any controversy and without any attention. Is if nobody's watching, then nobody knows that anything fishy is going on here. So we want people to pay attention. We want people to watch, and we want the U.S. Justice Department to take a look at this. And because again, from my vantage point, what is happening to Stephen is wrong, and certainly what is happening to the people in Ecuador is wrong. And you know, and you know, separately, I mean, I'm trying to think of ways that we can legislatively, either in appropriations bills or uh, uh, you know foreign aid bills, to to get the United States government more involved in looking at what is happening in Ecuador right now, and specifically what was Chevron's role, and you know what is the appropriate responsibility of any U.S. corporation that pollutes an area as large as the one that Chevron did. So this is about. I mean, this is so. Those of us who sign on to the letter are signing on to this letter not just because we think Steven Donziger is getting railroaded here, getting a raw deal, but we're also committing to focusing more on this issue in general as legislation moves its way through the House floor to the president's desk that may be relevant to this issue.
now, you and the other signers of the letter have faced some criticism in conservative media, in particular, the Wall Street Journal attacked uh, you, saying essentially that the signers of the letter are progressives for contempt of court. That was how they put it. What is your response to critics and on the conservative end of the spectrum who are saying this is the judiciary's matter?
Well, I would find that ironic that conservatives who abuse the courts on a regular basis, who are constantly challenging everything, and who are packing the courts on a regular basis, would you know would find anything even the slightest bit wrong with what we're doing. And look, we are not. I'm not calling the judge and saying do this or else. I mean, I'm simply saying I think we all are simply saying is that this process is highly unusual.
Mm.
We don't know of any precedent quite like this. we think Chevron has its fingerprints on everything.
Mm.
And we are worried that a human rights social justice attorney is going to get railroaded for speaking truth to power here. And at the same time, the people whose voice he tried to raise are going to continue to be neglected. So, we're not telling the Attorney General or the Justice Department, here's how this has to work. We're saying, you know what, this just doesn't look right to us. Please get involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I am not an attorney. I don't pretend to be one, but I care deeply about human rights. I care deeply about corporate polluters that do things like Chevron did, and I think we have to speak up when we see something wrong. And I think what's happening here is wrong. I have thought that way for a long, long time. I look back and I regret that I didn't do more to push the Obama administration to be more aggressive in pursuing justice in the case of the people in Ecuador. But here we are now, and a good guy, and I think Steven is a good guy. And I say that not just because I know him and I went to college with him. I say it because he has dedicated his life to doing good things, and he doesn't deserve this. And certainly there ought to be clarity in this case, and there's none. I don't know what. I haven't heard any justification by any of those who are going after him as to why what's happening to him is reasonable. And as far as the Wall Street Journal goes, I mean, I read their article. I mean, they kind of missed the point. And again, I would encourage them, to send a reporter or their editorial writer to visit the same places that you and I did, and then come back and say, "Oh, it's no big deal," and because it is a big deal, right. And we need to understand that, and I'm really glad that people are raising their voices and calling attention to this, because whatever happens, it's not going to be unknown to the public, because people are watching, and we'll see how what happens tomorrow.
You mentioned your longstanding concern for human rights. You're the co-chair of the Human Rights Commission in the House of Representatives. In terms of obviously, you've known Steven Donziger a long time. You believe that the allegations against him are false. Setting aside everything against him, what needs to be done for the people in the Amazon, the people who you've spoken to and I've spoken to, quite and apart from everything that's playing out in the courts today?
We need to help them clean up this mess. And the United States, and quite frankly, the world community ought to be more invested in the Amazon region, because it's being destroyed, and not just in Ecuador, but also in Brazil and in other parts of South America. And I think we ought to find ways to incentivize countries not to develop in these precious areas. And in the case of Ecuador, we ought to try to help them clean this place up. And it's long overdue, but I think we have a moral obligation to do that. Again, this is a U.S. corporation that did this. They can afford to help in a major way with the cleanup. Quite frankly, and I said this to them when they came to see me after my visit, I told the Chevron people that it would actually be good for your image if you actually did something good, and you decided to acknowledge that the previous practices were unsafe and resulted in this terrible catastrophe, and we're going to help clean this up. Obviously, they didn't see it my way, and they decided to spend millions and millions and millions of more dollars going after Steven Donziger. But putting that aside, you know, if we care about this planet, we ought to care about this region in particular, this very precious part of our planet, and we ought to be finding ways to again incentivize the protection of these areas.
Do you remember what representatives of Chevron you spoke to?
I'm sure I go back and I can find the names who are there, but I think what what bothered me the most is that there didn't seem to be the least bit of sympathy for what the people of the region were going through. I mean, it was almost as if, again, basically downplaying the impact of oil if we ingest it, and basically characterizing the people of the region as poor people who, when they hear that there might be some money to be had, make things up to try to get some money, to try to enrich themselves. That was not my experience with regard to the people I met. I mean, people weren't looking for big cash settlements. They were looking for things to be cleaned up. They were looking to be able to have access to clean drinking water. Indigenous communities wanted to be left alone. They didn't want to deal with kind of the outside world, yet they had no choice because they could no longer live off the land. The fish that were once plentiful are gone. So their whole communities began to disintegrate. So I think what bothered me about Chevron is that I'm trying to think of a nice way to say I don't think they gave a shit, but that's my opinion of them. And again, as an American citizen, as a United States congressman, it just made me feel sad and ashamed. This is a corporation that is affiliated with the United States, and this is what they did. And we have a choice. We could just kind of let it go, or we can try to remedy the injustice here. And I hope that we remedy the injustice, no matter how long it takes. Again, we need a global plan to save the precious Amazon region. There's no doubt about that. And hopefully this new administration will step up to the plate and lead a global effort. But in addition to that, what the area we're talking about in Ecuador, this is not about, development now. This is about pollution. Mm-hmm. This is about contamination. This is about people getting sick. Mm. And we have the power to fix it, and I hope that we do.
Thank you very much for your time, Congressman. Just one more question. I want you to talk a little bit about throughout your career, you have cared a lot about Latin American issues. I wanted to know how this fits in on the spectrum of that, and if you can comment more on your travels and focuses on human rights issues in the Latin American region.
Yeah, my first kind of encounter with human rights issues in Latin America were in the early 1980s when I was an aide to a congressman from Boston, a guy named Joe Moakley. And when he would do office hours, people would come in to talk about the plight of mostly Salvadoran refugees who were fleeing a war in El Salvador and coming to the United States, and they were looking for protection. So Congressman Moakley didn't know very much about El Salvador, so he sent me down to check things out. And I went down and I saw with my own eyes the horrific human rights conditions in El Salvador. People being targeted for death and torture because they were student activists, or that they were leaders of the union movement, or they were priests or nuns demanding justice. And so he led an effort to protect those refugees. He established what we call a temporary protected status program, But during that time, I traveled there many, many times. And then in 1989, 6 Jesuit priests were murdered in cold blood, and Moakley was asked to do the investigation, and I was the person assigned on his staff to lead it on the staff level, and we uncovered the truth, and that was that of the 26 triggermen that went onto the campus and murdered the 6 priests, their housekeeper and her daughter, 22 of them graduated from the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia. They're all trained by the United States. They all had guns made in the United States. The bullets and the guns were all made in the United States. And the high command of the Salvadoran Armed Forces that our government said were wonderful gave the orders and covered it up. And so for me, and I'm kind of repeating myself because I said this about Chevron as well, but for me, again, as a young congressional aide, as a U.S. citizen, my country was responsible for that, and it bothered me greatly. And I was determined to fight to try to, to repair the damage that we did. I think most people in the United States don't think of our country as a country that would give military aid to a military that raped and murdered nuns or killed an archbishop or murdered priests or student leaders or labor leaders. I mean, I don't think anybody wants our tax dollars to go in that direction, but yet it did. And I'm really proud that Joe Moakley was able to actually cut U.S. military assistance to El Salvador in the aftermath of the murder of the Jesuit priests. But I feel the same way now. Whether it's whether we're backing tyrants or bullies or murderous thugs and security forces, or whether or not we're giving cover to a big U.S. corporation that contaminated and polluted some of the most precious acreage in the world. We can't be silent. If people like me do not want our country to be viewed, as the bad guy, or as the defender of human rights violators, or the defender of corporate polluters, then we have to change things. And so anyway, I feel very strongly about Latin America because we over the years have done so much damage there. We have to repair that damage, and in the case of Ecuador, it is to clean up the mess that Chevron left, and as we fight for that, I hope that good people like Steven Donziger don't get screwed. Don't become victims, of corporate greed and overreach, and it is a sad situation. But I'm hoping for the best, but no matter what happens, there is a growing number in Congress that are now refocusing on this issue, and we're not going away.
Thank you very much, Congressman.